Well, it always happens that way. Things get more complex to do more, and then as the technology advances further, it gets simpler again until the next quantum jump,
Yeah.
and then it becomes complex again.
Are self-driving cars the future of transportation, or are they just Roombas bumping around all over the city? Let's find out together. I was just in San Francisco last month for the Limitless event, and this was my first time I got a chance to ride the Waymo. I have to say it was a completely different experience. And I've seen a lot of people talk about Waymo from a self-driving and autonomous driving perspective, but I wanted to see something different from it. It was a complicated ride, which I had with the Waymo, but before we dive into that, I want to look at it from three different perspectives. The first perspective is of all the other Uber drivers and taxi drivers who are driving in the city. The second perspective is of the passenger in all of these cars. And the third is the pedestrian who's on the street or riding a bike in the city. This was a very complicated ride just because of how busy the city is, with tourists, bike riders, and pedestrians all over the place. Other cars not following the regulation all the time, but Waymo had to navigate all of that in that busy downtown area, and it could only go so far. And I ran into some trouble. But let's dive in and see what I've learned from my time with the Waymo. The first is the perspective of all the other Uber drivers or the Lyft drivers who have been driving in the city for such a long time. They're the ones who actually built sort of this ecosystem of ride hailing and all of the apps. It's on their backs that all of these companies are actually doing so well. So I had the opportunity to talk to a bunch of people in the city, and what I realized was that everyone's actually super scared of what's happening. They're already seeing a lot of their business going away. All the premium tier drivers are actually going down to UberX, and they're seeing a lot less demand of what's happening with Waymo or other self-driving options like Zoox coming into the city. They're a little bit scared financially as to how will they make sure that their ends are being met, but they're also sort of in this mindset of this is never going to work, and a lot of these self-driving cars cause issues and accidents, and they end up in the news for all the wrong reasons. And you might have seen that on X and other social platforms as to what's happening with these self-driving cars. I saw a story about the cars honking all night long in the parking lot. I've seen cars which have been stuck on the street. I've seen a story about a car which was stuck in the parking lot going around in circles, and it never made it to its destination. But that's the perspective which all the drivers are coming in. They have an uncertain future as to what's going to happen, and they are still skeptical whether the self-driving future is here or not. They're thankful that the Waymos or Zoox don't actually go to the airport, and those are the rides which they're actually capitalizing on. Second perspective is of the passenger. So I was a passenger, and it was an interesting experience. Very, very interesting and very, very scary. This was the first time I actually called the Waymo, and I was on a busy street. It did not know where to stop. It had to figure out where I was and what I was doing. I tried to walk up to it. I opened the door. The seatbelt was already on, so I had to take it off, and then it started screaming at me to put the seatbelt back on, which was a little bit tricky. But throughout the ride, it had a couple of minor issues where it would stop in the middle of the street without any rhyme or reason. And I was wondering whether I should call for help or not. But then automatically, after a while, I think its backup mechanisms kicked in, and it was able to continue the ride. Overall, it felt like a very human-like Uber driver to me without anyone being there. There was some sense of insecurity that there is no one there who can help me in case something went wrong. But on the flip side, as a passenger, I also feel like there's no one there who's judging me or any other sort of preconceived notions about who the passenger is, what I'm doing, what I'm wearing, and all of that went away. So I could just come in, I was completely safe, there's no one there. Somehow it's almost an extension of my own private space, and it gives me a little bit more privacy, even though I'm being monitored and watched all the time. So that was an interesting perspective shift which I had. I went into the Waymo thinking that it was still not safe. But by the end of the ride, I wasn't really thinking about whether it's a self driving car or whether it's an Uber driver. It all felt the same. The one good thing about Waymo in particular was that all the cars are the same. So I always know what to expect. The cars are going to be clean, there's not going to be any smell inside it. The one thing which the Uber driver actually told me about passenger behavior was people who go out to party a lot on Friday and Saturday, they end up picking Waymo or Zoox over Uber because if they are too drunk to actually get into a cab or an Uber, the Uber drivers can usually turn them away versus a Waymo cannot. So they feel more comfortable going in. And same for a lot of women who actually feel safer going into a Waymo versus going into an Uber with a person who's looking at them, and they're just not that level of comfort which is there with a real person there. And finally, looking at the pedestrian perspective. So after my Waymo ride, I wasn't really thinking too much about it because Waymos are still a little bit too expensive compared to what Uber and Lyft are offering. So I was thinking, it doesn't matter. I'll probably take an Uber right now because Waymo is a little bit more expensive. But what I realized when I was walking around in the city was I was actually crossing the street. It was my right of way. It was my turn to go. And then suddenly an Uber actually came and almost hit me. It stopped like 4 inches away from my feet. And I was kind of in a shock. So I did not realize what had happened. The automated braking system of that car had kicked in. The Uber driver started screaming at me, even though it was my right of way. And I realized that that's something which would never happen, or the chances of that happening with a Waymo are actually very low versus what's happening with Uber drivers every single day. So for the pedestrians and the people walking around the city, or tourists, or anyone who's actually not paying attention to cars, um, it's actually a nicer situation for self-driving cars to be there, because that way I can feel safer and explore and not have to worry about a drunk driver actually hitting me, or a driver who's not paying attention and looking at their phone hitting me. The Waymo actually sees everything that's happening around it. It has radars and it has cameras which are monitoring what's in front of it a few meters ahead. So essentially, there's no moment in time where the Waymo is actually not paying attention to the road. It's always looking at people around it. And therefore, the likelihood of it actually hitting me is actually much lower. And therefore, it feels like the tech might just be safer than what we have with human drivers. So as soon as that incident happened, my entire perspective shifted, and I realized that even though the cars might not be the best situation at the moment, they're trying to improve. Yes, people are having issues with it. The cars stop in the middle of the road. The cars don't understand what honking at them means. They block traffic. But in the next 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, we are seeing a future where all self-driving cars will actually be nicer in the city versus driving myself. I'm hoping that with economies of scale, it will actually be as cheap or cheaper to actually work with Uber right now. That being said, what's going to happen with all the drivers? I personally feel that the drivers will figure out a way to manage a fleet of these cars, because there could still be incidents and issues which need to be managed. So they're looking at all the video of all the cars that they have in their fleet, and they're managing all of them remotely. So instead of having to go out in the world and having to drive a car manually, they're just sort of controlling all of them, and they're completing that human in the loop process. I feel like there's a lot of opportunity in increasing the autonomous driving behavior in other parts of public transportation, and I'm hoping that all of these companies are actually looking at that. I also saw that they're coming back to New York, and Tesla's taxi service is also going to get launched pretty quickly. So I'm looking forward to trying out all the other autonomous driving taxi services. But I feel like there's a big opportunity for these companies to go into the public sector and improve how transportation works there, so that instead of carrying just one person or a couple of people, they're carrying a lot of people around. And that's sort of helping the city out for more and more transportation needs. The drivers of Uber and Lyft are going to adapt by managing a fleet of cars. The passengers are going to maximize whatever they get, whether it's money, safety, or comfort. And pedestrians, we're just trying to make sure that we don't get run over. If you like what you see, please subscribe and leave a comment. Thanks.